I think I'm kind of in that same group as a lot of people. Almost no financial training growing up. Um, when I graduated university, I didn't really know exactly how to get the most out of taxes. I didn't know anything about investing. It was kind of an interesting situation. I never was really inspired to look. It's kind of a I kind of I kind of come to this a little bit on the late side. It really wasn't until the pandemic that I took a hard look at investing, that I took a hard look at what I could be doing. It's kind of interesting. My background when it comes to, like, I come from a science background, and when I started to look a little bit into investing and started looking at compounding and things like that, and the math really, really started to stick out. And I was kind of like, ooh, math. I like math. And but what was that sort of that light switch moment? It was kind of the pandemic had just begun. I was sitting there and I was watching videos on YouTube, and I actually ran into Kevin O'Leary video, and he was just talking about compounding, and I was listening to it, and I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. So at that point, I was just like, I think I really need to take a hard look at something. And when I say I want to take a hard look at something, it usually means I'm going to read a big book. It usually means I'm going to absorb a lot of information. And I did. I absorbed a lot of information fast. And I brought with me the scientific method. And I started applying that to fundamental analysis. And I found that stocks actually made a lot more sense than I think most people understand. And once you kind of see the patterns within, I don't know, within the woodwork, you all of a sudden get a different appreciation. And at that point, I was just kind of like, I think I kind of want to do this. I also had a background in training, and I was just like, well, how can I mix these two together? And that's when the idea to start a YouTube channel came from. I'm like, this would be an idea. So I didn't start a YouTube channel immediately. I found a current YouTuber at that time, and I basically became invaluable to him, and sort of learned a little bit about YouTube behind the scenes, and kind of had a small base that I could bring with me because I spent I think about the first year roughly, just helping another YouTuber. And then I jumped. I took the jump. I took the leap in. I started and I kept going, and it's been quite the journey since then. I've learned a lot along the way, and I've, I've picked up quite a following, and I appreciate it. And a lot of times people come at me and they're like, they assume that I've been in finance my entire life, just because I'm good with, I'm just good with knowledge. I'm good with data. And, that's not always the case. And a lot of times I try to explain, especially to new people, it took me, 4.5 years to get where I'm at right now. You're going to get better. You're going to learn something new every day. And if you approach investing saying, you know what, I don't know a lot, but I'm going to improve. And, the decisions I make in my portfolio next month are going to be better than the ones I make this month. I mean, I like the idea of fire, but I'll straightforward. A lot of people who come, like right now, the key demographic in my channel is pretty much 40 plus. So I get a lot of the older Canadians who come in. And a lot of them are beyond that point of fire. Like if you really want to do fire, so basically financial independence, retire early, you you kind of need to start pretty early to do that. And I think it's a great idea. But here's the thing. I don't think it exists at the same time. And I'll explain why. Because even if you are into fire, if you've had that level of dedications that you can retire from your own job, your portfolio at that point pretty much becomes your job. So it's not that you have technically retired. You've retired from the old rat race, but I still think you're going to be still sort of moving on, and you'll probably end up doing other things and looking at other streams of income because that's what it's all about. If you want to work for yourself, if you want to have, that really good life in retirement, you're probably never going to stop. you know, maybe someday, but there's so many things that you can do. Even just looking at your portfolio, going in there, managing things, making sure you're getting the most for whatever you're doing. Now, if you're just investing, it's a lot easier. If you move into the trading aspect, that's another whole can of worms right there. And sometimes you can do both. You can absolutely do both. Um, but yeah, no, I like the concept of fire. I think it's something that if you have that dedication and if you start early enough, you should try it. Even if you don't achieve it, your portfolio is probably going to be better than it would have been if you hadn't tried it. So it's kind of one of those things where, failure is still a pretty good scenario compared to whether or not you do retire. I look at fire, I guess for me, if I'm thinking of fire, for me, fire is being able to take control of my own finances. So not needing external sources. So for example, having to work a 9 to 5 to be able to live, and having that freedom to pretty much do what I want to do with my life from that point. So what I would envision fire, like if I was going to go into fire, um, the way I would envision it is I would then have the option to I could live wherever I wanted to, because I'm not sort of tied to a location. I'm not tied to a job. I'm tied to whatever. If I'm using distributions, great. It doesn't matter where I'm at. I could get up and I could move to, I don't know, Newfoundland if I wanted to, and it'd be perfectly fine. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I see fire. I think it's more or less freedom from the grind. Um yeah, it's just freedom from the grind, I think is the best words to say. And but like I just said earlier as well, you're still going to be working. I mean, your portfolio will still be kind of your big job because obviously you may have enough income coming out right now, but do you have enough if we go into a bear market? What if a few of your big dividend payers or distribution payers, what if a few of them all of a sudden cut their distributions? How does that impact? What's your safety? What's this? Basically, I like to say this: what's your standard deviation on that income? Because that's how I would look at it. For me, if I was working towards fire and I was at that point that I wanted to pull the trigger on it, I would have a standard deviation. I'd basically say, all right, well, here's how much income's coming in. Here's where it could go in the best of times. Here's where it could go in the worst of times. Can I survive in the worst of times? If my answer is no, then I'm probably not even ready yet. I'm probably close, but I'm probably not ready. So I like to I always say this: look at every scenario, do the math on the best, do the math on the worst, prepare for the worst. Then, no matter what, if you're prepared for the worst, whatever you're going to get is probably going to be better. Let's talk about the benefits first. So, obviously, the fact that it is a tax free, and I hate the word savings account because they should have called it a tax-free investing account. Because I will tell you, I have run into people who just put money in their TFSA and not realize that they can buy stocks with it. My mom was one of those people. I was just like, what are you doing? The money's just sitting there depreciating. So that's kind of one of those important things. So yes, there's a lot of, one of the best things about it is there are, let's say, for example, if you want to get a REIT. So a REIT is a real estate investment trust. So the way REITs work is that they don't pay taxes. They pass those taxes on to their shareholders. So when you receive a distribution from a REIT, it's 100% taxable. If you're holding that outside of a TFSA, well, you're getting taxed dollar for dollar. Whereas putting that in the TFSA is a really good spot for it because then you've negated that. And that's the tool. That's the power of the TFSA. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't understand how the TFSA works. So Yes, you can do all of that. You get additional space every year, and it's a fixed amount, which is great because it doesn't, you don't have to make a certain amount to get your full space, which is really, really good. You also, within that, is if you're using it as, let's say you're let's say you've retired and you're using it as an income machine. So you've got a whole bunch of different income producing assets within it, and you're pulling out, let's say you're pulling out $10,000 a year. Well, what people don't understand is that January 1st, they get their new room, but all the money they took out, if they've been taking that, if they took that 10,000 out as income every year, they get that 10,000 back as well. So that's one of those areas that people sometimes don't know. So it's very, very powerful. And in fact, in the terms of where you should be putting your money, um, almost every case it'll come in at number one. Let's just touch on that 4% rule for a moment. If you are, as you head into retirement and you get into that point, I think if you start moving in towards income, I don't think you have to sell anything. I mean, you should be able to, because if you have to sell things to sort of help you survive at that point, then you're probably not ready for fire. So I would say, keep your assets together. You shouldn't have to sell unless there's some kind of a structural reason that you want to sell. So, for example, maybe there's a better opportunity out there that you could actually increase your income. Maybe that might be one reason to sell. But you shouldn't be selling to pull things out to live off of it. Because that's the whole thing. And yes, the 4% rule, it kind of doesn't apply to income. I think to me, that's always been more about if you're trying to run a dividend growth. But here, let me give you a problem with that. Here's the one problem with that. So I will sometimes get people who will come in to my chat and they'll say, oh, well, I can make more with dividend growth and I can just sell to meet my needs. Fantastic. Wonderful. Yes, you can. In the good times, that works really, really well. But what happens in a bear market? So if we have a bad bear market, all of a sudden you're that person who has to sell, and you're being forced to sell at a loss. You don't have a choice because you're living off of it, and that hurts. That hurts big time. Whereas that person who has set up the income, they've got the steady income coming. They may have had a few distribution cuts here and there with some of them, but if you guys remember when I was talking a little bit about that standard deviation, as long as it stays within that standard deviation, you should be absolutely fine. So there's no need to me, there's no need for the 4% rule. I don't like it. I will say that right away, because logically to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It looks really great on paper when the market's cooperating, but when the market's not cooperating, oh boy. Fire began before we had all of these income options. Fire began when that was how you had it, how you had to liquidate to get money to be able to, pay your bills. Maybe, get some gifts for the grandkids, all of that fun stuff. So, and fire hasn't changed that much. So I think fire, in many senses, I almost think it needs to be deconstructed and reconstructed with the modern investing environment in mind. I don't know if anybody's done that. I am not aware of anybody who has done that, but you don't have to sell anything. Like, create the income you want. Now, here's one other kind of little exception. So, if you do happen to have a bunch of stuff in your RRSP, well, there's nothing wrong with drawing down on that. It makes sense ideally, it makes sense to actually empty your RRSP before your days are done, because of taxes, once again. So let's just say, for example, if you have a full RRSP and yet you're drawing down money out of your TFSA, here's the sad reality. If you pass all of the stuff in your RRSP, it will get taxed as basically at your marginal rate. It'll get taxed. So you'll get hit big time on the taxes. Whereas money in your TFSA, if you leave it to one of your kids or something, it actually doesn't get hit at that marginal rate. So it's much more tax efficient for passing it on, which, hopefully it doesn't happen anytime soon for any of you guys. But it's one of those things to keep in mind. So there's another thing out there called meltdown, which is in regards to the RRSP, and it does make sense. So if you're moving into those years where you're no longer making a lot of money and you're just getting by with what's coming out of your TFSA, look at what's in your RRSP. This might be the time to be pulling out. Like, I would definitely say you should be pulling out enough money so that whatever contribution room you get back, plus, if you've been pulling the income out as well, that as well. You want to be pulling that much, at least that much, out of your RRSP and moving it into the TFSA, because then guess what? Next year you're making more income. And the other thing I will say too is, let's say, for example, let's say you've done well and you're pulling out, let's say your TFSA is producing about, let's say, I don't know, $50,000 a year. We're just pulling this off the top of my head. If you had a TFSA, well, one, you did really well. Congratulations for one. But if you don't need all of the income coming out of your TFSA, and keep in mind, you've got other income sources as well. As you got your CPP. Maybe you have a pension from the jobs that you've held in your life. I don't know, but if you don't need it all, reinvest. NAV erosion. I always look at it this way. I still like to look at the fundamentals of the ETFs I'm holding. So if I'm holding an ETF and the underlying assets are moving up, they don't, even if it's just a little bit, if they're moving up, but yet that ETF isn't, I've got a problem with that ETF. To me, that would be my definition of NAV erosion. So, if, of course, the underlying assets are going down, of course, I expect the ETF NAV to go down as well. That makes sense. That's perfectly fine. But it is that one situation where, like I said, if the underlying assets are going up, the ETF is going down, I don't want anything to do with that ETF. It's, I don't care how big the yield is. It's probably that the yield is too big. And the problem is that how sustainable is that in the long term? And don't get caught in the rock trap. So when I say rock means return of capital. So a lot of people say NAV erosion and rock are the same thing. And they're not. They're not even remotely close. So return of capital, it's a tax classification. So when the CRA is classifying income coming in through distributions, you've got normal things. You've got eligible dividends. You've got ineligible dividends. You've got foreign income. You've got interest. You've got capital gains. But then everything else, everything else pretty much falls under this catch-all, and they call it return of capital. They still want to tax it. They don't know how. So what they do is they use return of capital to lower your adjusted cost base. So you're not paying the taxes on return of capital right now, but if you sell your asset, obviously you have a lower adjusted cost base. That means you're going to have a higher capital gain. Simple as that. So they'll get your taxes at that point. So people will often see return of capital on these funds and they'll be like, oh my God, there's NAV erosion happening. Because it says it in the name, return of capital. They're just giving you your money back. And that's not what's happening most times. And that's why it gets confusing, because if it is a poorly designed fund where there is actual NAV erosion going, then that return of capital kind of is like you're getting your capital back in those situations. So be a little careful when you're looking at a tax breakdown and you see a high rock value. It doesn't mean that you're having NAV erosion. NAV erosion, once again, look at the underlying assets. What are they doing? So in a sense, even if you were to take a spreadsheet and just sort of chart what that ETF is holding. Now, in some cases, the ETF may be holding a lot of stuff, and that may not be practical. But in a case like that, so let's say you were holding an ETF that was concentrated in mostly TSX 60 stocks. Well, you could compare it to the TSX 60. What's the TSX 60 doing? Is it going up and you're going down? That's a problem. That's, is it nav erosion? It could potentially be nav erosion. Nav erosion, it's kind of like the boogeyman of of income investing. I mean, it exists, but it's really hard to sort of say, look right there, that's nav erosion. It never shows up in a photograph. It's like a blurry shot of the sky when you say you saw something up there. Once you start going north of 15, I start to pay attention. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything that has a yield higher than 15% is bad, but it will get a lot more scrutiny. Where if I have a fund, it's got a dividend yield of like 10%, I'm going to look at it, I mean, I'll still check to make sure it's moving in the right direction, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about it. But once you start going north of 15, like if I was looking at a fund and let's say it had a dividend yield of 26%, that's going to have me a little worried initially. And I'm going to want to know why. Now, you can, in all fairness, when you start looking at some of the single share ETFs, you can get some pretty high yields because, well, there's a lot of volatility. Volatility means higher premiums. So I take that into consideration at that point. Let's pull leverage into the mix. So when you're looking at leverage, here's the first thing. And this is the biggest misunderstanding. A lot of people are saying, oh my God, I can't hold leverage because when it goes down hard. Yeah, it does. If you're holding 25% leverage, or let's say, we'll use 25. If you're using 25% leverage, you should fall, 1.25 times faster than the underlying asset. But on the other side, you're going to rise 1.25. So if you're holding it for a longer period of time, so for example, if it's in your retirement portfolio and you're using it to generate income, it cancels each other out both ways. Now, here's the one benefit. I'll give you this, and before we talk about the comparison to the underlying assets, but here's a benefit most people don't realize. So because you are holding an extra 25%, you are receiving an extra 25% of that distribution, even when it's down. So when you look at cover calls, one effect they have is they call it downside protection. I don't like it being called that only because it makes it sound like it's big. It's not that big. It helps a little. It does help buffer a tiny bit. And in the case of a leveraged ETF, you get an extra 25% help as well. So it's not a bad thing. It works pretty well in both directions. Now, will it make up for the lost upside? This really depends on a couple of things. If you're writing at the money, the answer is no. It won't, because you're not giving any room. So especially in a strong bull market, at the money covered call, even though it's got 25 or 33% leverage, let's say, either of those, it's not gonna do it. It's just not gonna do it. There's nothing you can do. In we'll call it a bull market still, but in a softer bull market where things are moving up gradually, you've got a chance that leverage will basically recapture the upside that you've lost. So the chance is there for sure. It also, any of the down markets, it's pretty good that way as well. So going down, that leverage will certainly help you in that sense. But keep in mind, when I say help you, that's going back to you're getting extra distributions. First of all, split cores are uniquely Canadian. So they were invented in Canada, and as far as I know, you can only get them in Canada. So the way a split core works is, in a nutshell, a company will they'll create two baskets within a single basket. It sounds a little confusing, but it's not that confusing. So you will have a set of shares called the preferred shares, and then you'll have your Class A shares. So it splits it into two baskets. So the preferred shares, those are basically designed for people who are looking for just a steady income. So they will give a particular dividend. It's guaranteed. and the people will receive it. It's not a super high dividend. It's just the people want that stability. Now, what ends up happening is the other half of this basket, so basically the other basket, the Class A, they kind of get everything that's left over. So the way that will work is once you've paid off all the preferred, if there's a ton left over, and there usually is, that all goes to the Class A. So they can get some crazy growth, and they usually get pretty high double-digit distributions. That's fantastic. It works, especially in a bull market. Yeah, they're great. You got a lot of money coming in. You got a lot of money flowing into the Class A shares. There's a small little caveat though, and that has to do with the NAV. So if the NAV, and there's a threshold on it at $15. So if the NAV falls below $15, you have to suspend the dividends on Class A shares. The preferred still get their shares because they're guaranteed, but the Class A might get suspended. So during the pandemic, there were a few split cores that had to suspend their shares for a little bit, but for the most part, it doesn't happen that often. Now, here's the thing that trips people up when they hear that $15 threshold. They might look at their split core and see it's like $8, $9, and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm not going to get my dividend." Well, the threshold is not, because remember how I said it's kind of like 1, but it's 2. The threshold is on the 1. So it's the both, you add them together. So if you, let's say, for example, you had an $8 Class A and a $10 preferred, well, that actually has a combined NAV of $18. So it's $3 above that threshold. So they can do really, really well. And they used to be the only game in town for income investors, pretty much in the early part of the pandemic. So they are another interesting. They're very interesting. I will say that because you're going to get some growth, and you're going to get a really good dividend for the most part. Well, distribution for the most part. The best time to start investing was yesterday. The next best time is today. It really is true. It doesn't matter to me if you're coming at this with $1 million or if you're coming at this with 50 cents. There are ways. There are brokers out there that you can even do fractional investing. You can invest a little bit. And the reality is, in the whole process of learning about finance and learning about investing, you might all of a sudden find that you can utilize your money a lot better than you thought you could. And a lot of people waste money. A lot of people, if they don't have any place to put it, what do? It's like, I just got this $10 left over. What do I do? I don't know. I'll go buy a, a latte or something. And, whereas if you got that investing mindset and you're like, oh, well, I got this $10 left over at the end of the month. That could be a share. That could be an ETF that'll continue to pay me money. So it doesn't, like, I always look at it this way. If you've only, let's say you're retiring in a year, you're 64 years old, you're planning to retire at 65, you got nothing in savings, nothing in your you don't even know what your TFSA is. In a year, we're not going to make you a millionaire by any means, shape, or form, but we could still get you something coming out on the other end of that. So I always look at it as being worthwhile one way or another. And worst case scenario, if you come at it really late in life, learn from what I can throw at you, and maybe pass it on to your kids or your grandkids, so they don't get in that same situation.